racist, really, system where you have buses that certain people can ride on and certain people can't. And so I was part of a group of Palestinian youth that boarded these buses and then were forcefully dragged off. It was reminiscent of, we actually modeled it after the civil rights, freedom rights here. But just to show how in the occupied territories, you have people, and you have Israelis living on complicated Palestinian land, and they have their own colonies, really, with lush gardens and pools. They're sitting on hilltops, they have their own bus system, their own school system, and they use roads that are built on confiscated, demolished Palestinian land in order to get from one settlement to another and go into Jerusalem and Israel proper. And they don't pay attention to, they don't care, well, I don't want to say they don't care as far as individual people, and you might have some people that are bothered by this that live there because some of the settlements, settlers maybe for economic reasons, but still the fact that they are depriving Palestinians not of only their land, but of their resources, including water, their ability to travel, really, because you have these settlements that are dotted the occupied Palestinian territories. And I digressed a little bit. All of these things took place while the world was saying or Israelis and Palestinians are engaged in a peace process. And so when Palestinians protested this, here's another settlement, here's another checkpoint coming up. More houses are being demolished. The rate of the homes that were demolished in Jerusalem is astounding because working towards a peace plan, Israel wanted to get a lot of Palestinians out of Jerusalem. And so one of the easiest ways to do that is to demolish Palestinian homes, give them no place to live, and of course not allow them to be built, not issuing any permits for Palestinians to build them. That's why in 2000, when what triggered it, who later became Israeli prime minister, but at the time he was the leader of the opposition party, Ariel Sharon, many of you probably have heard of. He recently passed away. But he made this declaration that he was going up on Haram Sharif, which the Israelis call it Temple Mount, the Jews call Temple Mount, which is the holiest place for Muslims in Jerusalem. It's the third holiest place in the world. Holiest place for Jews also, but there was an understanding that they don't go there. This is where the Palestinian mosque is, the Muslim mosques, etc. He made a declaration that he was going up there, not only going up there, but also with an entourage and approximate about 1,000 security police forces. He said he went up there in a gesture of peace, but it was really to assert, Israeli sovereignty over all of Jerusalem, over all of what Palestinians consider is also their land. But that sparked protests, to which Israeli security forces responded with live fire, killing 6, ended up being 7 Palestinians on the first day of protests. So more protests took place than in all Palestinian towns and villages, and even in Palestinian villages inside Israel, responded to with more force, and that's how the Intifada began, that's how it spiraled. It was sparked by Ariel Sharon's visit, but that's not what kept it going. What kept it going was the frustration over all of these years of a fake peace process. The Palestinians really said, we don't want to participate in anymore. This hasn't been peace, this has been Israel cementing the occupation while we go along with it, letting the world think that we are in a peace process. So what did we end up doing? Talking to some leaders of the First Intifada, what I heard was overwhelmingly, in a sentence, people tell me that, Wade, you're right, in that we have to continue our popular protest. We don't have an army, we're no match for Israel militarily, and even an armed Intifada, most of our people can't protest, children aren't going to take part, elderly aren't going to take part, and our strangers and our people. We don't have. The problem is that we, or the people I was talking to, a generation that's older than mine, that lived the First Intifada, that struggled with such high hopes, and people gave of themselves. Almost every male I know that was of age at the time spent a considerable amount of time time in jail, years of their lives in jail, on average maybe 10 years, but proudly, because we were engaged in a popular struggle that was going to get us our freedom. And then what it got them was Oslo, what it got them was more occupation. And so come around, and here's me, maybe on the 90th day, we have to continue our nonviolent protests. They're like, we know, but that generation is disillusioned, that generation is tired, that generation doesn't really believe anymore that we have the power, that people power can actually change the dynamic that we're living in. So one woman told me, she's like, it's got to be your generation that moves it forward. So then, okay, but then how do you do that with a generation of people that are feeling so disempowered? And one of the things that we ended up doing is deciding to globalize the Intifada. And there had been a history of international solidarity with the Palestinian struggle, but what we wanted to do or decided to do was, let's call people from all over the world to come to Palestine and see what's happening with their own eyes, stand with Palestinian protesters. And we didn't know if we knew it was going to work. I was emailing with a colleague that I had where I was in school at the University of Michigan, we were bringing a delegation of people. What we just did was plan a 2-week campaign against checkpoints and roadblocks. Our campaign, so we invited people to come, and we're going to work with the Palestinians to dismantle roadblocks. Roadblocks are the Israeli military, we put them up. They have checkpoints, which are manned by soldiers. And you have to, they take all different forms, but generally you have to have you have to show your ID going through, you have to go through a humiliating security check, sometimes wait in line for hours, depending on what the soldiers feel like on that particular day. But then they also have roadblocks where they block the entrances to roads and villages with big mounds of rock or dirt, sometimes big cinder blocks. So we were going to dismantle those, and we were going to protest the checkpoint for 2 weeks. And the dream was, maybe thousands of people would come, we would form this huge civilian army that would stand up to the Israeli military. The reality was, maybe nobody would come because it looks like a war zone, and why would you go travel somewhere thousands of miles away and put your life on the line if you didn't have to? So it wasn't the thousands that came, but some people, about 50 for our first campaign. And we did what we said we were going to do, and those 50 people went home. And then started emailing us saying, hey, when's your second campaign? So we're like, okay, let's plan a second campaign, and we did. Around Christmas time, I think 2001 was our second campaign. And then we planned a third campaign. I think today I would say maybe 8,000 to 9,000 people have come through from over 30 different countries around the world, all different ages. The youngest we've taken is 18, but we've had also, I think we had a volunteer that was 85, and all different kinds of backgrounds too. And the idea for us was, and there are different motivations for people that come, and there's presented a lot of challenges in organizing too, but to break down really the foundation or the strategic objectives of forming the International Solidarity Movement. Not that we necessarily got strategic objectives then, we were just trying to scramble to do something that might make a difference. But if I could break it down into 4 things, it would be why get internationals involved. First reason would be to form some kind of protective accompaniment, because you mentioned the Palestinians taking the streets and protesting alone were being faced with military force and were being killed, and weren't even held accountable for killing Palestinians. And so if you had international, lots of different people that didn't look Palestinian, we thought that there would be a little bit more reserve in using lethal force on 2 levels, both on the soldiers that are, looking at some people that aren't Palestinian, and sadly, I think that there's been a level of dehumanization that takes place that doesn't take place or isn't there when you look at when a soldier sees someone that's not Palestinian. And also on the larger level, the government level, because you have people then from the UK, United States, places in Europe or other countries that are going to be upset non-lethal force against protesters. The second reason, or the second strategic objective, was to change the way the mainstream media was reporting on what's happening. I don't know if you guys are probably too young back then, a lot of you, but when the Intifada broke out, it was largely blamed on the Palestinians. It was, wait, hey, we're in the peace process. Why did you start this, protesting? You walked away from the negotiating table. Almost entirely blamed on then Chairman Yasser Arafat for turning his back on the peace process. It was not looked at as a situation where you have people struggling for their freedom and you have occupiers. It was, at best, a conflict with two sides. It's been going on hundreds of years, and some people call it religious conflict. It's not. Some people like to couch it in religious terms. It's a political conflict. It's a situation of occupied versus occupier. But that's not how it's being portrayed. And obviously, what's portrayed is because of people's understanding is very important. And just to give you a brief example of how I found it interesting, there was one demonstration I participated in where what Israel had done was tear a trench in the only road leading from the main Palestinian city of Ramallah, highly, I don't want to say cosmopolitan, but it's really a big city and source of a lot of work, politics, etc. in the occupied territories. It leads to about 30, 35 smaller villages and one of the main, most prominent Palestinian universities. So the main road that leads there, they dug a huge trench in it so no more vehicles can go over this road, which is a serious inconvenience for people going to school, people going home from their work to the villages, but also a life-threatening situation for example, if an ambulance has to get to a village because someone is having a heart attack or a medical emergency, this ambulance couldn't go anymore across this road, had to go up through this mountain. So the people of the university, the administration, and the students organized a march where they were using their hands to fix the road. They didn't even want to use any tools because they didn't want the Israeli military to mistake the tools for any kind of weapon. So after we had finished and we had fixed the road with our hands, what happens? Israeli bulldozers that were standing up on the hilltops watching us come down to tear it up again. They throw some tear gas bombs to clear the people out. You have some people, maybe 10 young men or so, that started throwing stones at the bulldozer, and then soldiers started shooting. You had about 10 people injured that day. One young man was killed that day. And the American media, which is what I monitored, portrayed this as clashes between Palestinians and Israeli soldiers. They show like the rock throwing and one Palestinian killed. Now, if it was maybe anywhere else, it would be Palestinians protesting, whether it was a human rights protest, whether it was, a humanitarian crisis, whether it was Palestinian right to education. This was organized by a university to fix the road, protesting for the right to go to school without this kind of disruption, and Israel opens fire. But no, it was at best clashes. And we wanted to change the way that the media was reporting on things by getting people, if you end up coming here, a student at San Diego State University, and you see with your own eyes what's happening, and you go back and you tell people, you talk to a classroom like this, or to your friends, or you write to your local paper, or your local news station might take an interest that you're, a few thousand miles away participating in these kinds of activities, and may actually give you a chance to talk about what you see. And we thought that internationals could help, not in replace Palestinian voices, but at least help it get out. And the third thing was to create an alternative media source, again by having internationals which can tell stories in different ways, even if not in the mainstream media and other ways. And the fourth was for the morale of the people that were living under occupation and thought that things were so hopeless that either it wasn't worth struggling or that there were only limited ways that you could struggle. And I don't want to keep digressing into these stories, but just one more which really brought home the importance of that fourth point, the human interaction, the morale of people that feel so isolated when they see someone coming from Europe, Canada, the United States, California, wherever they're coming from, to stand in solidarity, sometimes really putting their lives on the line. We've had some volunteers that have been seriously injured. We've had a volunteer that has been killed. It means a lot. And one of the main things that people heard was all we wanted to do was go back and tell people what we saw. It was in 2001 where Israel had reinvaded all these Palestinian towns and cities, and they were conducting a massive military operation in the Palestinian city of Nablus, where they were going home to home, blowing up the doors to houses, raiding the houses. We sent a small team of volunteers that really couldn't do much up against this big military, but what they were doing was trying to stay in the streets with their cameras and follow the soldiers, just let the soldiers know that we're watching you, hopefully that they wouldn't be as violent. So my role was to train volunteers in Jerusalem. I got a phone call from somebody in Nablus, and it was a man who really didn't identify himself, but told me that he was in his home with his family, and the soldiers hadn't come to his home yet, but they're coming. And he sees the internationals in the streets. And he doesn't think these internationals are going to do anything to help his or his family. But he sees them, and he just wanted to thank them. And I don't even know how he knew my number or what I was, to call me. But that's all he said. I see them, and I want to say thank you. And so I think that's one of the key things in international solidarity is that bond that you form with people when they see that you're coming not as any kind of superior, not as an occupier, but as an equal. And sometimes, also to learn, and let them know that you're there to learn, and also just to be in solidarity. So international solidarity movement is still going on today. I'll leave all the details of some of the things that we do, but I know we have a wall that's up here on campus. One of the things that we've been doing for the past few years, since really 2003, is standing with Palestinian communities that have been resisting this wall coming up on their land because it has torn up Palestinian land and trees in its path, and it has isolated communities from one another. Sometimes the wall goes right through a Palestinian community, and you have a family that's on one side, part of the family is on the other side, and they can hardly see each other anymore because where you used to only be able to have to travel 5 minutes, now you have to go around. It might take you 2 hours because not only the road you have to go around, but the checkpoint that you have to go through that you might not be able to pass depending on how a soldier feels on a particular day. It has also put Palestinian communities in what's called like a seam zone. So they're stuck between a wall and the green line, which leads into Israel proper. And so they can't go this way into the other parts of the West Bank, and they can't go this way into Israel, and so they're just stuck in the middle. And this is in addition to all the land that's been confiscated and all the livelihood that has been lost because a lot of land that's gone through is farming territory, and a lot of Palestinians, especially the villages in these areas, are farmers that depend on this land for their livelihood. I briefly just want to touch on Gaza, and then am I getting close to my time?
About 7 minutes.
We used to be able to send volunteers to Gaza every week. That ended when not only was one of our volunteers killed, actually, two of our volunteers were killed in Gaza, almost in the same place. Rachel Corey was she was 23 years old at